Okay, welcome everybody to this section. We are doing complexity and expertise in this section. My name is Mark Sheffield, and I'm going to be your chair for this little section of talks we've got here. First up today is going to be James Rowan. Welcome, James. James is going to be speaking on technology, education, and mastery. 10,000 hours against the bleeding edge. So, James, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm presenting something today that I'm developing. It's got a lot of me in it, and I come from an applied research background, and I'll get into that. So it's kind of my first foray into a little bit more academic research. So I'm looking forward to some help to get in that direction, hoping to do my master's next year. I'll stop prefacing things. I said, my name is James Rowan, and I am a Kung Fu master. Now, this is a North American thing, maybe. Does everybody know what Kung Fu is? Yeah? It's Chinese martial arts from the movies? Okay, good. Just making sure. Because, you know, it's kind of a weird term, and for me to say that, I'm probably not exactly what you imagine when you see in your mind a Kung Fu master, right? Click. Click. Emmy. There it is. I'm not old enough, right? I don't have the long beard. I don't have the robes. Do I live on a mountain? You know, I'll dispel a little bit of the illusion. No one really trains on the mountains anymore. They're tourist attractions. But the metaphor is useful. You know, the idea that one must travel to the mountain to seek the knowledge from the master. But what does that whole Kung Fu master thing mean? The term itself is challenging. So let me give you a little background about myself in this world. For the last 20 years, I've been studying with a traditional master, my Sifu, in the culture, language, and martial arts from China, collectively we know as Kung Fu, made famous by all those movies. And a Kung Fu master, right? But still the term is very vacuous. It's kind of confusing. And it's not the Kung Fu part, really, when you get into it. That translates to a lot of things in English, but we land on the idea that it's a great skill achieved over a long period of time. Now, the challenge is actually in the term master. Because in academia, a master's degree is pretty well defined. It shows that you've demonstrated a high-level expertise or perhaps a high-level overview of a professional practice. And we look at those credentials for our professors in university and colleges. And if you think about it, the metaphor for post-secondary, university and colleges is kind of the same. Students travel great distances. They go to campus to learn from the experts, from the masters. You know, and that really used to be the only way that we could pursue meaningful education in our careers, or at least it used to be. So now, maybe I should explain why I find myself here today. Because in my other life, I've worked for Sheridan College for the last 15 years. My expertise is in film and television technology. And specifically for the last 4 or so years, I've worked as a researcher at CERT, Sheridan's Screen Industries and Research Training Center. And we focus our efforts on applied research. If you're not familiar with that term, it's our mandate to help and support industry innovate. We provide access to new and emerging technologies to companies that otherwise might not be able to afford or access that expertise. We work on specific novel challenges, and we also offer training and educational access. We've worked with companies across sectors, not just in entertainment, but in medical. We do a lot of software development. My specialization, though, is from my other film background. I work with game engine technology, like Unreal Engine, to do real-time visual effects. If you're familiar with The Mandalorian or Star Trek Strange New Worlds, I manage the large LED screen technology pictured here that we use for real-time special effects. Last year, I helped design and facilitate curriculum for Sheridan's first of its kind micro-credential in virtual production, which is what we call this. We ran the cohort last year, and another cohort is running right now. And I'm a subject matter expert. And there's probably only 100 people in this country that can do what me and my peers do. But I only started working with these technologies 2 years ago. So I find myself at a very challenging nexus. On the one side, I prescribe to this life view that expertise and mastery comes from years of focus. borrowing a popular author's interpretation, 10,000 hours of focus and meaningful practice on a specific task to develop advanced proficiency. By my math, I've thrown 1 million punches and kicks in my life. I put in my time. But in my other life, where I make a living, it's not the same case. In this emerging field, I'm still the expert. I'm still the master on the mountain, but it didn't take me 20 years of solitude. And in fact, the technology we profess to be experts on has only existed for a few years. So it's between these two lives that I've had to find a commonality and a way to reconcile what it is to be an authority. And I think that reconciliation there has a lesson for all of us, because technology forces us all to be rapid learners and adapters. And we saw that earlier during the pandemic, not earlier. And this has just been a growing challenge, because on a great scale during the pandemic, we saw this change, but there have been growing changes in the educational landscape for a number of years preceding COVID. So how did I become an expert in this emerging technology of game engines? YouTube. There was a couple white papers. There was a couple articles. But I didn't squeeze 10,000 hours into this effort. It was all available for free online. Right? And I never traveled to any metaphorical mountains. And the consequences for this are kind of far-reaching. Right? And this is something that you're probably all feeling in your practices all over the world, but universities and college are no longer the great and only option for educational and vocational training. With the right mindset and disposition, you can become very versed in just about anything online. So it's an interesting time in post-secondary. And I will use the terms post-secondary, college, and university sort of interchangeably. That may be different culturally, but just so you're aware. And we've never really had our authority challenged this way before. Most of us here probably went to university or college because that was the only way to learn a trade and get an education. And that's simply just not the case anymore. If we look at our neighbors in the South, the United States, we'll see an extreme. The cost of tuition has gone up continuously over the last 50 years. Yet the value statement of what that means for students with degrees have gone down. Fewer students are seeing the prospective career benefit versus the cost of getting those degrees. And as a result, students are turning away from post-secondary altogether. Now, in Canada, we are not quite the United States. Like I said, we see an extreme. But we should be aware, even though, and just so you know, in Canada, post-secondary is also not free. But in terms of domestic enrollment, it is on the decline, despite the fact that tuition has stayed flat for the last 5 years. If we look at numbers for graduation, they increase, but due to a combination of funding cuts and other factors, universities and colleges have been more and more reliant on international student enrollment. And in Canada, international students pay twice the price for tuition. So we rely on them to cover those costs. And knowing this, if we look a little bit closer at those numbers, we see that any growth in graduation is due to the fact that we have a growing number of international students coming here to study. Colleges have filed for bankruptcy in Ontario. And one study looking at how Canadians felt about their financial situation after post-secondary and student loans, 81% reported that they would do something differently. 14% said that they regretted attending post-secondary altogether. Now, quick survey of the room. How many people here have ever watched a video or read an article online to learn something? How many people have paid to do the same? Paid for a course, paid for an article, right? You likely didn't pay as much as a university or college course or a night school course. But what's probably interesting is that you almost certainly applied that in a very short time frame. You want to learn something? Well, why not learn it right now? And that's very satisfying. It's quite a different model. And yes, it's not the same. I'm not comparing the YouTube video to a college education. Those are well-defined learning outcomes over multiple courses. We use scaffolding to build towards more complex ideas and outcomes. But there are other platforms and other entities that offer general and specific vocational training, even certifications completely online. Coursera, for example, offers many certifications in many fields for costs. But you can actually audit all of their courses for free. Now, I'm not suggesting we should replace what we do in higher education with online courses or free alternatives. Quite the opposite. But the perception from the student is going to take a slant to what they know and what they have access to. And they know they can find answers online. But at the center of all this conversation is technology. This is what I know. And the pandemic moved us all forward years in terms of adoption. And if COVID taught us anything, it's that working adults must be able to acquire new skills rapidly and likely continuously. I forget the color choice. Post-secondary schools were forced to throw a lot of resources into retraining and implementation of online platforms for online learning. And what the administration found were solutions to problems that they actually already had. Things like space, cost, and access. So while students are now returning to the classrooms, not all of them are. And they all will. There is no going back. Now, we used to have an advantage, a very clear advantage in our post-secondary communities, and that we offered something you couldn't get anywhere else. Historically, it started as just an education, but that grew up to include all of the social activities that are involved with going away to college and university. And we're in jeopardy of losing some of that. Students leave here differently because of the experiences they've had here. And a lot of those are intrinsic experiences, shared experience you have outside of the classroom setting. So you add to this some of the inherent challenges that we face here in terms of developing post-secondary curriculum. Large institutions aren't made to move quickly. It's hard for us to stay current. Faculty require difficult to obtain qualifications, masters and doctorates. So it's hard to find people that fit that criteria, but also have experience in industry on the bleeding edge. And that makes it difficult to compete against some of the smaller and private educational options. But you don't have to be the first to be the best. Largest tech company, the most successful tech company in the world, Apple, shows us that every single year. We already have the skills and the expertise as educators. But to be the best, we have to embrace technology, and as well as a couple of paradigms. And you may have seen this in your communities, but we're seeing one way that post-sec is embracing that or trying to remain contextually relevant is the creation of micro-credentials. And if you're unfamiliar, they're short, very specific programs that are usually geared to specific career skill sets. And the idea isn't exactly new. There's been certification programs like this for a long time in things like accounting and project management in IT. Canada, we have our chartered professional accountant, CPA, project management professional, PMP, Cisco certified. Micro-credentials read a little bit more like a university certificate, but for a specific vocation. There's a film production accounting course offered by York University, or the aforementioned virtual production micro-credential we offer at Sheridan. And these programs scope similar to online learning, but they try to lend the reputation of the university or the college to give that credential value. And they need to because bespoke programs are expensive. And as of yet, there isn't a lot of statistical evidence that they're beneficial to advance one's career. But in fairness, it's pretty early in the conversation to see that in the data. I think there's an advantage that micro-credentials have is that they don't have to be online. And I would actually argue the opposite. Because in terms of program, the future is blended. And if you're not familiar with the term of blended learning or the blended classroom experience, I really like this definition conveniently from the University of Waterloo, where we had one of our keynote speakers. And that it's the purposeful, that's the important word, purposeful integration and alignment of online and in-person components. Distance education is not the same as online education, nor the same as an online course in a hybrid program. So the structure of the curriculum shouldn't be the same either. And I think this is the important thing, because there needs to be time and research devoted to better understanding what effective blending experiences look like across sectors. Earlier today, no, in the other room, they were talking about simulation. And earlier we were talking about working and learning, right? These are all those sort of ideas, but they're not going to look the same across every spectrum. And I don't think there's enough research. This conference is always not the place to say that, or about it, because that's really where we're going to find our landing pad in the future. We need to then find ways to use technology to enhance that experience and not offset the costs. But inevitably, what am I saying to us as educators? And it's that we're going to have to learn even more new technology to face these challenges. If your reaction to the end of the pandemic was, we made it, we survived that technical landscape, I'm sorry, it's not going away. Because technology doesn't do that. And for all the reasons I've mentioned, that the administration likes it, it creates all these interesting opportunities. Technology doesn't go away, it evolves. And it requires us as a society to evolve with it. Organizations that were willing to embrace change during the pandemic absolutely have prospered. But we need to be aware and not become complacent, because the next revolution is coming. And actually, it's already here, AI. And if you haven't yet been affected by artificial intelligence, I promise you, you will. Your work will. And very soon. But don't worry, it's actually a good thing. It's a scary thing, but it's a good thing, and it's a conversation for another day. Next slide. So I haven't really offered anything new yet, though I actually think I kind of grounded our conversation in the Canadian market pretty well, which is nice, I think, for the whole conference. But the establishment of quality educational resources online is something that post-secondary is aware of, and that's why we're seeing these changes at the programming and institutional level, way above my pay grade. But to change a paradigm is daunting, and ultimately it's going to come down to the facilitators on the front lines taking action on these ideas. And that inevitably will mean that educators will either be teaching new technology or teaching while using new technology. And supporting the learning and training will be a big place of the changing landscape. I mean, I won't profess to have any answers, but from this point, I think I have some experience. And so I want to share a little bit from my experience of teaching technology, a few ideas that have helped me get to where I am. And in the spirit of Kung Fu, I've put them in the form of axioms. So, axiom number 1, become comfortable with saying, I don't know. Because there will be times where you don't, and that's okay. There's been an exception for a really long time in our society, probably yours, that the value of knowing is where one gets value, but it's not the case. It's what you do with that knowledge that matters. When you don't know something, seek it out. If a student comes to you and asks you something you don't know, challenge them to do the same. When you both come back and have a conversation, you'll both grow because of it. And it's interesting, as I've learned in the martial arts, the way the master approaches the problem is different than the way that the student approaches the problem. Your experience will take you in one direction, and their inexperience will take them in another. And the interesting thing is, in technology, that's not always the wrong direction. And sometimes their solution will be better. Have an open mind. Be willing to say, I don't know. Number 2, specialize. Be an educator. You probably have already developed some subject matter expertise and now develop technical skills to support both. Specialize in them. And I don't just mean the content that you might be teaching if it's a technology, but it can also be the tools that you use. And that's a skill. Technical skills, like any other skill, can be learned. They can be fostered and they can grow. You don't need to understand all of the features of the software you use in your practice, whether it's teaching or your subject matter expertise, but develop an understanding of a few of the most relevant ones. That will serve you in your practice. And when something comes up you don't know, refer back to number one. Then watch some videos online, maybe look it up on an article, a white page, and sign up for a course. And 3, develop the most important skill that exists in the digital world, applied research. And that's okay. Applied research skills is something we all already do. It can be as simple as going online and looking up a how-to. See, applied research is just the process of seeking out or identifying a question, seeking out the body of knowledge and applying that knowledge directly to the real world. And that grows your expertise. That's experience. And that makes you better at number 2, which, as we said, and if you need to work on number 2, go back to number 1. They feed into each other, much like the practice of martial arts. The student becomes the master, and the master again becomes the student. Skip that example. There you go. And as you develop that ability and that expertise and that tool set, you'll get better to know what to search for. Your applied research skills will grow. Knowing what to search for and when identifying problems is part of that expertise. Searching and trying solutions, well, that's experimentation. And that's learning. Right? And that builds knowledge and it creates experience, and experience becomes wisdom. And with time, wisdom becomes your content, your great skill learned over a long period of time. And then, mountain or not, you could be a master too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. I'm sure you've all got questions. Just to remind everybody that we're going to be doing questions after all speakers have spoken during this period. And there'll be a good half an hour there to ask some questions and to then have a chat individually at the end. So thanks for that, James. And now we're going to move on to our next speaker, Dennis Young, and he's going to be rethinking online communities of inquiry with complexity theory. So, Dennis, you're all ready to go.
Thank you.
And actually, just while Dennis is getting ready, though, we've had a few extra people come in the room. Is my Jess here? No. Okay, looks like we're only having 2 speakers in this session.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dennis. I'm still Young. Is the slide coming up? Should I? Okay. Anyway, I just find a connection between James and I. I'm from Hong Kong, so I guess everyone knows Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, they are Hong Kong stars. Yeah, so that's the connection. And I am currently studying my PhD degree in the University of Auckland. So I flew all the way from Southern Hemisphere here, and it's 6 a.m. about 6 a.m. and I stayed up all night. So bear with me if I got jet lag and speaking something strange. But Perry and Sean are my PhD supervisors. So today I'm going to share with you part of my PhD project about how we use complexity theory and to expand the boundaries of online teaching and learning. So a snapshot of today's presentation. I first talk about some challenges of applying complexity theory in education, most of in this context. And then I'll share about my research project, our inquiry into the basically my PhD research project. And then I'll talk about a couple of the thinking or rethinking or explorations we find from there. So first of all, applying complexity theory in education, it involves quite a little bit of things. So in the traditional way of understanding education, some people refer it as positivist, scientific inquiry, evidence-based, lots of names for those, but in general, that interprets our world in a reductive way, in a linear and predictable way. So basically, we try to use formula to predict what students do the best with which pedagogy, things like that. But with complexity theory, we know that we want to understand phenomena in an organic, non-linear way, so that we usually cannot predict what will happen, but we call it a more holistic approach to understand the education setting. So usually there's a versus between these two paradigms. We use either one of them. And there is always the question how we can operationalize the complexity theory, because scholar has been talking about or challenging about the practicality of complexity theory using in education. And also, someone would say that we can only, in a hindsight, that we can predict or we can understand educational phenomena, but we cannot provide norms or guidance for educational practice with the complexity theory paradigm. So that's the common criticism of CT. Our aim of the research thus try to draw the connection between these two, how we understand education sector with complexity theory in the online and blended learning. James already told us about blended learning, how we purposefully put students together in the online and as well as a face-to-face learning space. So what we're trying to do is we draw on some theoretical underpinnings from complexity theory, and then we try to harness the affordance of the educational technologies that we have been using recently, especially after COVID-19. And then we try to come up with a method that we can, or mechanism that we can try to combine these two and make it possible. So my study, or our study, we try to record the dynamic relations or interactions among students, among teachers and students in the online discussion forum of 12 postgraduate courses in my university. That's my project. You look into 12 postgraduate courses. All of them are teacher education programs or courses in 2020 and 2021, meaning that's the pandemic or lockdown periods in New Zealand and most of the world. I also use social network analysis. That's a method. I will talk about it a little bit more later, to try to record and provide a lens for us to analyze the interaction among students and teachers. And also we hope to capture feedback that is at a system level or emergent level, so that it can be used for a reflective teaching or course design approach for teachers. That's the aim. I'll talk about it a little bit more, and that's the a diagram. Basically, we look into how scholars or the teachers in university, how do they design and facilitate their online space. I also interview the students, the academics, the university teachers, on how they understand it, or why they designed their online space like that. Also, I use social network analysis to try to understand the interaction pattern of the students and teachers in these 12 courses. So a little bit about what is SNA, social network analysis. Basically, it expresses the relation or the interaction between all the entities, meaning the people in our example. In short, it's a tool that we can measure and also we can represent the relationship represent and measure will be the key things of why we choose social network analysis, because that will be the information for teachers to reflect on afterward, so that in the next round of teaching, they can do some more reflection from there. And of course, it has some sort of statistical analysis there, a set of standard and definition there, so that we can have a comparison across all the courses. So why SNA? Again, it highlights the pattern of the relationship in the interactions of teachers and students, and how it relates to complexity theory is that usually teachers will only look at, or previous research will only focus on individual students. The class is a collective of individual students, so we give survey to this student, we give survey to this student, and then we try to come up with everything by averaging out the survey result. But here, if we would like to argue that by social network analysis, we actually look at the whole class, how they interact with each other at a higher level, at a system level, or what we call here a macro social level. So that's the key thing, or sometimes we call it as a course vibe of the course. Why do we participate more in this particular course, not that course? Maybe because we like the teachers more, or the teachers kind of facilitate the class better. But that is lacking in most of the research, because most of the time we only focus on students' individual attributes, their ages, their background, their socio-economic class characteristics like that. And the second reason will be we think that this system level actually will have impact on how it shapes students' behavior. And that will be another source of data to explain the behavior and performance of students. So the structural relationship that I will be showing really soon, it gives us a tool for us to understand how the behavior of students, also when we recognize that learning is not individual, unlike watching YouTube, it could be an individual learning, but in a classroom setting, in our university, well, relation learning is really important. So what we are focusing on is how we can learn as a group instead of as individuals. And that means the system level class vibe thing will be a key factor when we are talking about the online teaching and learning there. And it's, again, a dynamic process, not a static thing. So social network analysis kind of be able to provide all these characteristics. And it also matched quite well with the complexity theory. Maybe many of you will know that the complex, one of the key characteristics will be complex adaptive systems, where the properties would not be fully explained or understood by its separate part or component. So it's again what I've been talking about, whether it's individual student or collective of individual student or the whole class level. I'll be showing some of the social network diagram, we call it sociograms, in a minute, but in order for you to understand a little bit better later on, I'll be giving a very brief concept of social network analysis. So usually we have a note and a link. I know we have different fields of people from different disciplines, so there are a lot of different terms to describe this dot and line. So usually I would use the nodes and links, but people would use ties, things like that. And for nodes, each node means individual in our setting. It could be teachers, it could be students. And for the link, it means interaction in the online discussion forum. So when I like a Twitter, when I tweet you, then you will have an arrow from myself to you. And then when you reply to me, and then you have another arrow. So that's the linkage between when you're reading the social grams. And there are two types of networks. The first one will be undirected and unweighted, something like that. I make up a really simple diagram here. So you can see there is a teacher here with a square represented by the square, teacher 1, and 3 students there. And you can see there are links between them. That's the first case. And the second case will be a directed and weighted network. So the same case here, the same 4 people there. But this time you can see there is a thicker arrow there. There are arrows from T1 to S1. And there is another arrow from S1 to T1, meaning that teacher talk to or pose pose a threat to the student, and then the student reply, or vice versa. And student 1 talk to student 2, but student 2 did not talk to student 1 in this situation. So this type of graph actually gives us more information about how the interaction actually happens. And the thickness of the link means the frequency of the interaction. So in my research, we'll use a directed and weighted network to kind of highlight a better situation. Because as you can see, if we just look at this undirected and non-weighted, lots of information will not be captured there. All right, so I kind of planned a small activity there. There are 2 courses there. They're the real data there. Could anyone tell us, or I'll give you 1 minute maybe, can you spot anything? What's something in common? What's something different? Again, teachers will be in square. So we have 3 teachers here, square. You can ignore the colors so at this point, because that will mean something else. So the closer to the center of the center, meaning the people talk more, post more. So you can see this particular student posts the most number of threads in their online course, and that's the teacher here in this course. I'll give you 1 minute. 1 minute. Any quick observation that you can find? Oh yes. Oh, okay. So I got 5 minutes left. I'll cut it to 20 seconds. Any quick findings you have so far? Yeah.
Well, on the left, we've got the teacher in the center and the students on the periphery, where it seems they've interacted maybe at multiple once, and it seems like half the students haven't interacted at all with the teacher.
Exactly. There is a bunch of what we call lurker, or
And on the right hand side, a very I would say one is teacher centric, one is student centric. Obviously, on the outside we've got 2 teachers, but maybe a lot of scaffolding learning or a lot of student interaction with other teachers.
Exactly. Yeah. We may come back if you ask me a question here later on, so I can have enough time to talk a little bit more. Something similar here, you can see limited student interaction there in this course. Only 1 actually. Mostly a one-to-one interaction from teachers to students, students to teachers. And here in this course, the teachers is one of the lurker there. Yeah, so basically sociograms, I included all these to give you a very brief idea of how we can use social network analysis as a tool for teachers to reflect on their own practice, because when I bring these diagram back to the interview with the teachers, they could talk about a lot of how they facilitate students' interaction and things like that. But in fact, they are just doing something like that, and then that will give them a big food for reflection or discussion on why the interaction pattern end up like that. So that will be the first things to go through with the teachers and how we use that tool with the teachers. And of course, I've mentioned about the social network analysis can generate a whole bunch of metrics that I'm not going to go into detail here. But something like you can tell from the ratio of teachers' degree means how many posts they post. For course A is like 1-to-1 ratio, but in course C, the teachers only speak very few things, but it kind of generate or students there can talk quite a number of things. So that will be a good place for us to try to see whether there's why is that so? Whether is it because of the differences in course design, or whether it's the differences in how teachers facilitate their online space. So these will be something for reflection again. So SNA opens up the how we understand interaction in a kind of a standardized way so that we can compare, and then again prompt teachers' reflection and explore how course design will be related to the interaction. One of the very interesting findings from my research will be actually the graded assessment. When students are required to do some online assignment to, for example, comment on students' work or peer assessment, then it really increases the density and the degree of the communication there. And if if there's voluntary things for you to just go there to share or for you to learn, usually in reality the student won't do that. So that will be something, one example of why course design is important. So the last line is that we think that complexity theory expand the boundaries in three things. The first thing is what I've discussed before, how teachers' conceptual understanding of the class. So it's no longer a collective of individual students, but the entire class. You can look at the entire class feedback and then try to adjust or to redesign your course in the next round. So a methodological boundary would be using something like social network analysis. It can be easily done in Canvas or Moodle, those type of learning management systems, to get a real-time feedback on how you are communicating with your students instead of waiting for the end of semester SAT assessment. Then that will be too late now. And the last boundary will be a pedagogical boundary. Are we just act as a controller or guide of knowledge, or are we actually creating in an active way as a catalyst of the learning in a self-organizing or learning space in that online space? So these are the three kind of reflection or things that we are still developing. And that's all for my sharing today. Thank you so much for your attention.